It's the end of the working week, everybody, and that means it's time for some Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and as you all know by now, this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. And if you're new to the show, Countdown to Classic goes through your expert opinion on the hot button issues and content of the sure to be amazing World of Warcraft Classic. Today we'll be doing the deepest of dives into the story of Sylvanas Windrunner to find out who she is and what makes her tick. If you hear anything on the show that you would like to comment on, then check countdowntoclassic.com for all the social links, or email feedback at countdowntoclassic.com with your reactions or memory lane or anger management submissions. There will be more shout outs and show news towards the end of the show, so please do stick around to possibly hear me throw you some love and give you some updates on what's to come on future episodes of the show. But for now, let's get to the lore and the story of Sylvanas Windrunner. Lady Sylvanas Windrunner, also referred to as the Dark Lady, Queen of the Forsaken, and the Banshee Queen, is the supreme ruler of the Forsaken, a powerful faction of undead on Azeroth. In life, Sylvanas was the Ranger General of Silvermoon, whose leadership acumen and martial prowess were without equal, forging her into a military genius. During the Third War, she bravely defended Kel'Thalas from a Scourge invasion led by the Death Knight Arthas Menethil. Ultimately, however, Sylvanas fell in battle as she was slayed by the Death Knight himself. Rather than honor the Ranger General with a quick death, Arthas ripped out her soul and transformed it into a banshee, a cunning and vengeful agent of the Lich King, empowered by hate. Sylvanas eventually broke away from her tyrannical master's control and reclaimed her body. Vowing to avenge her death, Sylvanas gathered other renegade undead and set out to wage war against the Scourge. Thus it was that the Forsaken came to be, with Sylvanas as their queen. Under Sylvanas's command, the Forsaken joined the Horde. She seeks a higher purpose for a people who have already died once. Under her leadership, the Forsaken have managed to not only fend off the Scourge, but also the Scarlet Crusade. She has a certain mastery of leadership, military strategy, and the bow. She's also adept at demon magic, having the ability to drain life, create skeletons, and use mind control. Sylvanas is the best archer on Azeroth. She claimed she could hit a flying bird in the eye. She wields Sunstrider's longbow, once owned by Darth Ramar Sunstrider. It was passed on to Sylvanas when she became Ranger General. Yet many challenges still lay ahead for Sylvanas. While Sylvanas maintains that her loyalty to the Horde is undiminished, some of the faction's members are uncertain about her true intentions. So let's go all the way back to the beginning now that we've heard that kind of opening blurb about Lady Sylvanas Windrunner. So, Sylvanas was a member of the prominent Windrunner family of High Elves. Sylvanas was the middle sister between the older sister Illyria and the younger sister Verisa. She also had a brother named Lirath. The House of Windrunner lived at Windrunner Spire in the tranquil forest of Kel'Thalas. Many consider the Windrunner family as the most tragic family in Warcraft lore. Several members of the family were killed by the orcs during the Second War, including the sisters' parents, their youngest brother Lirath, along with numerous relatives of varying proximity. Only Illyria, Sylvanas, Varisa, and their cousin Zendaren are known to have survived. This prompted Illyria to join the Alliance Expedition in order to avenge them. The Alliance Expedition, also known as the Sons of Lothar, were veterans of the Second War that ventured to the orc homeworld of Draenor during the invasion of Draenor in the wake of the Second War, with the goal of obtaining the Book of Medivh from Ner'zhul's grasp. Illyria disappeared with the expedition, never to be seen again. The rest of the Windrunner family was one of the hardest hit by the Scourge invasion into Kel'Thalas later in this story. Sylvanas was killed by Arthas and raised as a Banshee in his service, later becoming Banshee Queen of the Forsaken. The sisters' grandfather had to battle his own son, their uncle, after he was turned into an undead. And in what may perhaps be considered non-canon now, there was apparently an instance where another younger brother of Sylvanas's was torn to pieces by their older brother, who was then himself burned with the rest of the Scourge by elven resistance fighters. Now, back to canon stuff. And Sylvanas's grandfather survived the battle and managed to get to Varisa, but his subsequent fate is unknown. Roughly 500 years before the events of World of Warcraft, a group of high elven rangers formed the Farstriders, an organization officially encompassing their kind. The commander of the Farstriders was given a unique historic title, Ranger General of Silvermoon. The Farstriders were a small but highly skilled group of rangers. The organization can trace its roots back to the Troll Wars, a series of conflicts between the forest trolls of the Amani Empire and an alliance of the humans of Arathor and high elves of Kel'Thalas, ending approximately 2,800 years before the coming of the orcs to Azeroth. The initial group were a loosely affiliated band of high elf warriors, occasionally working together to defend Kel'Thalas. Before the Great Sundering, it is unknown if the Rangers were a formal organization or if Ranger was an individual title. The title of Ranger General actually predates the formal establishment of the Farstriders and was first given to a legendary ranger named Lady Windrunner. The title was eventually passed to Larissa Windrunner, whose eldest daughter, Illyria Windrunner, was expected to inherit the position, having proudly become a ranger along with her sister Sylvanas. Yet Illyria, who had always found little use for her people's traditions and expectations, chose to focus on more practical matters. Thus, Sylvanas became Ranger General in her stead, having risen steadily through the ranks and became military leader of all High Elven forces, in charge of Silvermoon's defences. Rangers were a special cadre of elven archers who were intimately bound to the wildlands of Lordaeron. Their pursuit of mastery in longbows, marksmanship, and scouting made them more rugged and even deadlier than their brothers, traits for which they were greatly feared amongst their enemies. These secretive and elite warriors had never involved themselves in the affairs of humans, but when horde onslaughts threatened to destroy the elven homelands, they quickly offered their services to the Alliance. Although their numbers were few, their presence could change the course of the war if they were deployed wisely. Elven rangers also turned to nature for aid, befriending animals. Some of them possess minor druidic abilities, as Varisa Windrunner was able to use the language of the trees of all plants and sense a plant's emotions and history through touch. Rangers were known to gather at the mills staffed by their elven brethren, honing their skills there. Prior to the Second War, Sylvanas earned a reputation as a fearless and cunning ranger while battling the forest trolls of the Omani Empire, as we said earlier. Sometime before the Second War, Sylvanas admitted the highly talented human ranger Nathanos Maris into the ranks of the Fast Riders to train in the art of war. This decision surprised many of her compatriots, and Nathanos was on the receiving end of prejudice from his elven comrades, many of whom objected to the presence of a human in their ranks. Halduron Brightwing and Renthar Hawkspear both argued against his inclusion in the ranks, and Nathanos had a particular animosity with Sylvanas' second-in-command, Lorthamar Theron, who claimed Nathanos felt intimidated by the Elven Rangers. Nathanos believed he could match Theron shot for shot. Some of Sylvanas' comrades took note of the inordinate amount of pride Sylvanas took in her human disciple, and opposed the notion of allowing a human to train with the Elven Rangers. Still, Nathanos felt unwelcome in the ancient city of the elves and tired of their politics, instead choosing to reside in his native Lordaeron, at his childhood home, the Maris Stead, located northwest of the ruins of Daroshir in the eastern Plaguelands. However, as a Ranger Lord, Nathanos owed allegiance to Silvermoon and was obligated to return and fight in its defense should the elves demand it. Sylvanas began frequently visiting Nathanos at his home. These visits were officially to hear reports, but rumours spread throughout the Fast Riders that she was involved in a romantic relationship with her human pupil. Nathanos worried that these rumours would negatively impact Sylvanas, who required the goodwill of her compatriots as Ranger General. Shortly before the onset of the Second War, Sylvanas visited Nathanos at the Maris Stead. She spoke to him of a potential invasion of Kel'Thalas from the Horde, and met Nathanos' young cousin, Stefan Maris. Sylvanas asked the boy if he wanted to be a ranger when he grew up, but he replied that he wanted to be a knight. Sylvanas gave him a gold coin and told him to keep it until he was old enough to buy his first sword. Before leaving, Sylvanas spent the night at the stead. And if you are interested in what eventually happened to Stefan Maris, it wasn't part of Vanilla, but I do encourage that you Google that and you'll see a very interesting little short story. Another prominent elf who took exception to Nathanos was High Elven Prince Kael'thas Sunstrider, who himself was rumoured to have sought Sylvanas' hand in marriage at one point. Eventually, Sunstrider sent a letter to Kel'Thalas demanding Sylvanas dismiss the human from the Ranger Corps. Despite this opposition, however, Sylvanas persisted, and her response was simply that Nathanos would be a loyal ally due to his ability, and believing that the High Elves must practice tolerance with the outside world. This belief in Nathanos' ability would prove correct, as Nathanos' talent allowed him to become the first and last of the human Ranger Lords. Nathanos' accomplishments were unprecedented, and he became a tactical genius, responsible for alliance victories spanning a decade of conflict. Also during the Second War, the High Elves initially sent only token support to the Alliance, though Sylvanas' older sister Illyria took her squad of rangers and joined the fight against the Horde as well. After the forests of Kel'Thalas mysteriously began to burn, Sylvanas and her rangers set out to discover the cause. She came across both her sisters being chased by a band of forest trolls, whom they dispatched quickly. Illyria alerted Sylvanas of the coming Orcish horde, and that it was they who were burning Kel'Thalas with dragonfire. Sylvanas and her rangers moved quickly to meet the horde and trap them between themselves and the Alliance forces under the command of the paladin Turalian, champion of the siege of Blackrock Mountain that we heard about previously on the show. The battle took many turns, but ultimately the horde abandoned Kel'Thalas. Sylvanas stayed behind to hunt down any remaining orcs. Shortly after, the horde was defeated, the dark portal destroyed, and the Second War ended. After the High Elves withdrew from the Alliance, Sylvanas and her rangers were the primary guards against any would-be attackers on Silvermoon. And some years later, those attackers would arrive in force. During the timeline of Warcraft 3, Azeroth came under attack. The Third War had begun with the Scourge's invasion of the world, and the Prince of Lordaeron, Arthas Menethil, had become the betrayer of Lordaeron as he became significantly corrupted over the course of the campaign, morphing into a fearsome Death Knight in the service of the Lich King. Fresh from destroying his homeland of Lordaeron, Prince Arthas turned his gaze northward and led his phalanxes towards Kel'Thalas with the purpose of defiling the kingdom's mystical Sunwell, a key component in the resurrection of the necromancer Kel'Thuzad. The history of Arthas and all of the events of Warcraft 3 will also be covered in a future episode of the show, so I'll just be focusing on what happens here in Kel'Thalas for now, and it may be covered again lightly another time. The elves were aware of the Scourge in Lordaeron, and thus were busy preparing for the undead. Anasterion rallied his people to action, but left the command of their army and defense to Sylvanas as Ranger General. Sylvanas had heard several disturbing rumors and reports concerning the state of Lordaeron, and they could no longer be ignored. Arthas arrived unexpectedly on the doorstep of Kel'Thalas, with a horde of undead at his back. Kel'Marin, one of Sylvanas' scouts, quickly informed her of the swarm of undeath fast approaching the first elf gate. Sylvanas organized her fast riders and went to observe the despoiler of Lordaeron herself. Sylvanas and her rangers departed to the Thalassian Pass and confronted the Twisted Prince in person. Sylvanas instructed him to turn back, though Arthas announced that death itself had come to the high home of the elves.
"You are not welcome here. I am Sylvanas Windrunner, Ranger General of Silvermoon. I advise you to turn back now."
"It is you who should turn back, Sylvanas. Death itself has come to your land."
After a failed attempt to kill the prince then and there, Sylvanas and her rangers began an attack on the undead forces, hoping the 3 elf gates could hold the Scourge invaders off. It did not take long for Arthas to crash through the first gate. With hulking Nerubian allies acting as sentient siege engines, Arthas's army rushed towards the next elf gate, slaying every elf who stood in his way. The human necromancers among the Scourge's ranks were hastily resurrecting the fallen elves as undead thralls. The Rangers attempted to counter this by cutting down the humans, though this too proved a mostly futile effort. With the first elf gate lost, Sylvanas and her surviving comrades were forced to fall back.
"Shindu Falana, fall back to the second gate. Fall back. You've won this gate, Butcher, but you won't get through the second. The inner gate to Silvermoon can only be opened with a special key, and it shall never be yours."
"You waste your time, woman. You cannot outrun the inevitable."
"You think that I'm running from you? Apparently you've never fought elves before."
The Ranger General acknowledged the unfavorable odds and knew that she could not win this battle. She maintained that the Magisters in Silvermoon City and the Isle of Kel'Danas, on the other hand, could still turn the battle around, and sent a number of runners to inform them of the impending attack. Arthas and his gargoyle allies slew almost every single runner Sylvanas sent back to the capital, though it did not take long for the danger to become apparent. Sylvanas organized the evacuation of Fairbreeze village and other nearby settlements. Given the unprecedented nature of the onslaught, not all of the fast riders were fighting together, and several ranger companies were initially unaware of the threat. Ranger Lord Lorthamar Theron was among them, patrolling around Suleiman. Lorthamar quickly became aware of the presence of an invading army and rushed west to confront them. However, he had not anticipated the nature of his enemies and was nearly killed by a group of risen elven guardians, losing the use of his left eye in the process. Fellow ranger Lord Haldurin Brightwing narrowly saved him from the undead, and the two rangers' companies rushed to defend the capital. Elsewhere, the elves Koltira, Faltora, and Meriel encountered a plethora of Scourge warriors and abominations, among them the powerful Death Knight Thessarion. In turn, all three of them met their end at the hands of the Scourge, the former of whom was later risen into a Death Knight by Thessarion himself. With the aid of a treacherous magister named Darkan Drathir, Arthas acquired the Key of the Three Moons, allowing him to bypass several of the elf gates and their defences. Overcoming each of Sylvanas' tactics, including an aerial Dragonhawk attack, by using the diversity and practicality of his undead army, Arthas surged forward and obliterated the elves' nearby settlements. Arthas eventually confronted Sylvanas. Frustrated at the harsh resistance she had given him, he charged her directly, and the two did battle. The exhausted Ranger General was unable to match the power of Frostmourne and was cut down. As a last mockery, Arthas sired her as an undead banshee, binding her to his will and forcing her to battle her homeland in his name.
I salute your bravery, elf, but the chase is over.
Then I'll make my stand here, Butcher. Anar la Belore. Finish it. I deserve a clean death.
After all you've put me through, woman, the last thing I'll give you is the peace of death.
As the undead army approached the capital, they wrought a trail of dark, unholy destruction upon the land. And a lot of stuff happened from there with Arthas in his story. But we're not talking about Arthas yet. That will be a 2-part episode coming very soon on the show. So we go back to what happened with Sylvanas. Well, the official story given by the High Elves of Silvermoon had the Ranger General perishing valiantly in battle against the undead Scourge in defense of Kel'Thalas, and her body was burned, as they told it, to ashes in the fire that had devastated half the capital. Ronan had been told a different story, that Sylvanas was instead captured, horribly mutilated, then finally slain for Arthas's pleasure. In this version of events, her body was taken into a dark temple, where Arthas corrupted her soul, transforming her into a haunting, mournful phantom called a banshee that was left to roam the ruins of Kel'Thalas. In truth, as Sylvanas lay dying, after being impaled by Frostmourne, she told Arthas to finish her, saying that she deserved a clean death. Having had to fight her every step of the way, Arthas responded by telling her the last thing he would give her was the peace of death. Moments after Sylvanas passed away into a comforting darkness, she felt agony unlike she had ever known. Arthas ripped her soul back into the world, and Sylvanas Windrunner became the first of the High Elven Banshees. She was able to give voice to her pain, and in doing so, she would cause pain to others. Her body was flung onto a meat wagon, lost among the thousands more the Scourge had claimed, and would later be locked in an iron coffin as a further act of vengeance upon the Ranger General. Sylvanas, now an undead banshee, was granted a number of unconventional abilities by Arthas. Though bound to his will completely, in a process that she likened to a puppet master pulling strings, Arthas allowed her to retain her self-awareness, so that she might witness the destruction she would bring to her people firsthand. Sylvanas the Banshee was paraded in front of Silvermoon as something of a trophy, and though the High Elves were shocked to the core, Sylvanas could not help but feel pride as they continued their futile, brutal struggle against Arthas. Though Arthas had been able to fill the first crossing with bodies to form a passage, Sylvanas gloated to him that he would never be able to do so to reach Keldanas and the Sunwell. Arthas plunged Frostmourne into the ocean and created a path of frost for his army to use instead. Arthas began his brutal assault on the Sunwell, and Sylvanas watched helplessly as he engaged in single combat with the High Elven ruler, High King Anasterian Sunstrider. She hoped dearly that the aged king could put an end to him, though knew that it was not possible. Her hopes were raised when Anasterian managed to dismount Arthas by grievously wounding his skeletal steed, Invincible, though the act only served to enrage Arthas further, and King Anasterian fell, both body and soul, before Frostmourne. Sylvanas witnessed the rebirth of Kel'Thuzad via the destruction of the Sunwell, and, overtaken with grief, let out a banshee's screech that almost deafened the army, but only amused Arthas. However, Sylvanas could not help but feel elated to see the traitor Darkhan Drathir cut down by Arthas as well. With that, the mighty elven homeland of Kel'Thalas suffered its darkest hour. The former Ranger General accompanied Arthas to a demon gate, where Kel'Thuzad communed with Archimonde. The demon instructed them to attack Dalaran next, and Sylvanas mocked Arthas for a hint of regret she could sense within him, pertaining to someone he perhaps had fond memories regarding, Jaina Proudmoore. Arthas quickly silenced her, exerting his dominion over her spirit, though Sylvanas could not suppress a smirk of satisfaction. Sylvanas was present after the fall of Dalaran for the summoning of Archimonde. Sylvanas became one of Arthas's primary generals, and she remained behind in Lordaeron with Kel'Thuzad under the watchful eye of the Dreadlords, who had been left stationed in Lordaeron to protect it in the name of the Legion. When Archimonde was defeated at the Battle of Mount Hyjal, Sylvanas would quickly learn of this news from Kel'Thuzad. As the months passed, the Dreadlords were still ignorant of their master's defeat. Varamathras, Detharok, and Balnazar, the three prime dreadlords overseeing Lordaeron, were convening over Sylvanas's undead as watchful eyes when Arthas stormed into the stronghold, fresh from his journey to Kalimdor. He informed them of the Legion's failure and his intentions to take control of the Scourge. The Dreadlords fled, outraged but unwilling to risk their lives by battling Arthas's army. Arthas approached his servants and ordered that Lordaeron be purged of all life as a tribute to Ner'zhul. Kel'Thuzad, however, informed him that human refugees had begun to flee from the outer villages, and that, should they escape into the mountain passes, they would be impossible to track. Arthas stationed himself and his two generals on the three possible escape routes, and they each led detachments of undead troops against the fleeing humans, while taking great pains to ensure that few, if any, made it past their blockade to safety. Despite the efforts of the paladin Daegrin the Orcslayer and his companions, Sylvanas led her banshees into battle against the human refugees, aided in the destruction of all the remaining villages in her area, and slaughtered any human trying to escape. Finally, Sylvanas, Arthas, and Kel'Thuzad arrived at the central headquarters of the Paladins and killed them all in a vicious battle, annihilating the last of the civilian presence in Lordaeron. Around this point, the weakened Ner'zhul began to lose control of the minds of Sylvanas and a number of banshees. She kept this discovery from Arthas and Kel'Thuzad while continuing to serve. The Dreadlords contacted Sylvanas and explained that they knew the cause and arranged a secret meeting with her. They told her that Ner'zhul's, and by extension Arthas's, powers were beginning to diminish. The Nathrazim intended to use this opportunity to seize control of Lordaeron. Sylvanas tentatively agreed to assist, but under the condition that her aid would be provided on her own terms. The Dreadlords planned on killing Arthas within the capital, but Sylvanas created a contingency plan in the case of Arthas's escape. She arranged for her banshees to feign allegiance and escort him to a place in the woods where she would be waiting for him. In the meantime, Sylvanas found her body that had been locked into a coffin as requested by Arthas to further torment her. After Arthas survived the Dreadlords' ambush and escaped the capital, Sylvanas' loyal sisters saw him to the arranged place and then killed his bodyguards. Hiding in the shadows, Sylvanas struck him with an arrow that she had crafted, a venomous sting that would paralyze Arthas. Arthas was furious at her betrayal and demanded that she finish him, but Sylvanas refused to show him the mercy of a quick death and intended to make him suffer, as he had made her suffer in undeath.
You walked right into this one, Arthas. It's time to even the scales.
Traitor! What have you done to me?
It's a special poisoned arrow I made just for you. The paralysis you're experiencing now is but a fraction of the agony you've caused me.
She was about to begin her grisly work when Kel'Thuzad arrived and intervened, killing her banshees and chasing her off. At some point, Sylvanas raised Velonara as a Dark Ranger. She did so probably with the others as well, being the other banshees. Arthas left for Northrend, having been summoned by the Lich King, and Kel'Thuzad went into hiding. Sylvanas and her sisters were freed, but Sylvanas was still troubled. Though free from Ner'zhul, she and the other free-willed loyalists remained monstrous abominations in appearance. Her thoughts were interrupted as Varamathras arrived on the scene. The Dreadlord invited the Banshee to join him and his brothers in their new order.
Greetings, Lady Sylvanas. My brothers and I appreciate the role you played in overthrowing Arthas. I've come to offer you a formal invitation to join our new order.
I lived as a slave long enough, Dreadlord. I won't relinquish my freedom by shackling myself to you fools.
But Sylvanas was not so quick to relinquish what freedom she had just gained. She told him that her assistance was enough and demanded to be left alone. Varamathras ominously warned that those who were not part of this new land would be cast aside and that she had best not vex the new rulers of the Plague Lands.
Careful, milady. It would be unwise to incur our wrath. We are the future of these Plague Lands. You can either join us and rule or be cast aside.
Sylvanas was adamant. As Varamathras departed, Sylvanas knew that an attack was imminent. But with only her banshees and some lesser undead to serve for her, Sylvanas was certain that she would soon fall. She needed to acquire an army. Scouting the outer wilderness, Sylvanas found a plethora of creatures who would serve her well, and with her banshees at her disposal, they would have little choice in the matter. She sent out her banshees to possess Mugthol, the leader of the local ogres, the bandits Lord Blackthorn, the Gnoll ruler Snarlmane, and the Murloc Puddle Lord. Those she did not possess were killed. With so many new allies, Varamathras was quick to fall before her. But after she defeated him, Varamathras begged for his life, saying that he could serve her well. He knew his brother's tactics and where their bases were located.
Sylvanas, spare my life, I beg you. I can be of service. I swear it.
Just like a demon. You'd sell your brethren out just to save your own skin. I'm listening.
I know what my brother's plans are. I know where their forces are based. Just let me serve you, and I'll help you defeat them.
Sylvanas knew trusting such an insidious creature was a risk, but felt that she could control him enough for her purposes. With Varimathras' assistance, they moved against Deathrok's forces. Deathrok had acquired a human puppet, Garithos, and his men, and was using them to protect himself. Sylvanas had his scouts possessed, and then infiltrated his base while their guard was down. As they slept, Sylvanas swept through the twin bases and slaughtered any before her. Though they eventually awoke and raised the alarm, it was too late. Sylvanas disabled the humans and ravaged Deathrok's forces, eventually coming to the Dreadlord himself and killing him swiftly. With the Dreadlord dead, Garithos was freed from his mental control. Sylvanas saw him as arrogant and foolish, but felt that she could use him. She lied and promised to relinquish control of the capital to him if he helped her kill Balnazar. She also encountered and freed Rhaegol Valdred, who initially assisted her, but later asked her to release him from her service, which she eventually agreed to do. The night before attacking the capital city, Sylvanas met with the freed undead. She spoke about their purpose in the world and what would come of them if they helped her retake the capital. An undead alchemist called Lydon asked her what would become of Garithos' humans. She responded that they will just serve for the battle. Garithos attacked from the rear entrance to the city as Sylvanas and Varimathras came from the front. As they moved into the city, Sylvanas found caches of items left by the Lordaeron royals and used them to further the assault. Despite the Dreadlord's demonic allies, his forces were destroyed, and as a final test of loyalty, Sylvanas demanded that Varimathras kill Balnazar. Varimathras froze, saying that it was forbidden for one Nathrazim to kill another, but she required Varimathras to prove his loyalty to her. Varimathras obeyed and struck down Balnazar.
It's over, Balnazar. Varimathras?
Yes, my lady.
Kill him.
But it is forbidden for one of the Nathrazim to kill another. My defection was one thing, but this...
I require one last test of your loyalty, Dreadlord. Do it.
However, whether by accident or design, Balnazar later re-emerged as a leader of the Scarlet Crusade. Varimathras was not so reluctant when Sylvanas ordered him to do the same to Garithos. With all their enemies dead, Sylvanas made a proclamation to Varimathras. They would rule the Plaguelands as the Forsaken, and would stake out their own destiny, where none would get in their way. Sylvanas quickly went about founding her new empire of undeath, freeing as many undead from the Lich King's dominion and organizing them into a new nation of their own. Sylvanas attacked the royal catacombs beneath the ruins of Capital City, the Undercity, and took it over for the Forsaken. The Forsaken have since worked to complete Arthas's plans in the Undercity, extending its dungeons and tombs considerably to forge a functional capital for their own use. The Forsaken, having carved a functional empire of their own, and with growing numbers by the day, knew that the next step to realizing their vengeance upon Arthas was to secure their place in the world. Though Sylvanas had presided over the civil war in the Plaguelands and successfully conquered the ruins of Lordaeron, how long the relatively small faction of the Forsaken could keep their holdings was unclear. As such, Sylvanas looked to find allies. She sent numerous ambassadors to the Horde under War Chief Thrall, though the Forsaken's admittance as an official member state was contested by a number of the faction's existing members. The kind-hearted Tauren of Thunderbluff proved to be the most promising contact. Specifically, Archdruid Hamul Runetotem saw the potential for redemption in Sylvanas' people, even though he was fully aware of the Forsaken's sinister nature. Thus the Tauren convinced War Chief Thrall, despite his misgivings, to forge an alliance of convenience between the Forsaken and the Horde. This alliance of convenience has granted the Horde a better footing in the mostly alliance-controlled Eastern Kingdoms, and in turn, with the Horde's protection and even the assistance of the Argent Dawn, the Forsaken were able to keep their holdings in Lordaeron. Having carved out an alliance with the Horde, the Forsaken looked to expanding their ever-growing empire of undeath. By freeing the minds of the undead under the sway of the Lich King, Sylvanas came to preside over an impressive faction of her own. At some point, Sylvanas also freed her former disciple, Ranger Lord Nathanos Maris, from the Scourge's cold grip. How did Nathanos come to die in the first place, you might ask? Well, after the fall of Stratholme, the Scourge swept over the once great nation of Lordaeron, killing all in its path and raising the fallen as cadaverous undead. Despite his great skill, Nathanos Maris fell as well at his house, murdered by the abomination Ramstein the Gorger. Nathanos rose as a mindless thrall of the Scourge, bound to the will of the Lich King, spreading the plague of undeath through the kingdom of his birth. Somehow, though, deep in his soul, he knew that Sylvanas would come for him, and she did. Sylvanas, having since been freed from Arthas's grasp, scoured Lordaeron for signs of Nathanos. When she found her old disciple, he had been reduced to a pitiful sight, a decaying slave feasting on corpses of his own making. Nathanos did not immediately recognize Sylvanas and attempted to attack her with the unending rage filling the void in his soul, but was fettered by Dark Ranger arrows while Sylvanas called him to his senses. Sylvanas tore Nathanos free from the Lich King's will and told her dishevelled former pupil of the plight of the Forsaken. She named Nathanos her champion in their quest to avenge themselves upon Arthas. After he was freed by Sylvanas, Nathanos hunted Ramstein the Gorger across the Plaguelands for months until the abomination fled to the safety of Stratholme. In death, Nathanos retained the deep loyalty he had felt towards Sylvanas in life. Were she to perish at the end of their quest, he knew he would happily follow her. Nathanos was named the champion of the Banshee Queen and took up residence in death at his old home through life on the Maris Stead, where he trained and directed his queen's new champions. There, he recruited Horde soldiers to fight against corrupted animals such as plague bats, the Scourge, and the zealous Scarlet Crusaders of Tyr's Hand, whose presence constantly harassed Forsaken lands. Nathanos collected relics from the Battle of Darashir for unknown reasons. He kept them in his home. Nathanos appeared to be secretive regarding personal details of his former life, even sending Horde adventurers to retrieve the Kel'Thalas registry that contained his file. He made sure to inform adventurers that the registry was not to be read. Nathanos took a special pleasure in tormenting the Lodge's elven residents, his former comrades, who had scorned him even while alive. Nathanos' death did not go unnoticed, nor did the fact that a body had never been found. Master Matthias Shaw, head of SI-7, the Stormwind Intelligence Agency, received some disturbing reports of unusual Forsaken activity in the Eastern Plaguelands and sent 5 agents to investigate. Only one of those agents returned, babbling incoherently about Nathanos and the word Blightcaller. He died in his sleep just days after his return, and Alliance adventurers were asked to go investigate their disappearance. The only thing SI-7 had to go on was that Nathanos Maris may have been slain by this Blightcaller, but the truth was far less pleasant. After investigating the grounds around the Maris Stead, adventurers uncovered the ugly reality. Nathanos was the Blightcaller, now a champion of the Banshee Queen. Once it was determined that Nathanos was the Blightcaller, Bolvar Fordragon enlisted Alliance adventurers to gather an army and destroy him. Nathanos, however, managed to survive this through faking his death. Interestingly, Reports say Sylvanas moves to and from Northrend. It's unknown if she is scouting for a possible attack on the Lich King or if she has darker plans. There are rumours that Lady Sylvanas Windrunner is setting up a Forsaken city up there somewhere. In any case, she remains an enigmatic figure, her motivations unknown even to her most trusted advisors. Sylvanas seems to be the object of a cult of personality, having become practically deified by her people. She is hailed as a saviour to the Forsaken, who commonly take her name as a greeting or a farewell. The notion that the Dark Lady watches over you and deep reverence for their queen has become an iconic part of Forsaken culture, and Sylvanas seems to approve of this. With Nathanos acting as her champion where she could send her promising warriors to train, Sylvanas ruled over the Forsaken from the Undercity with Varamathras by her side. Her goal, to one day take vengeance upon Arthas and find lasting freedom for her cursed people. And that's the story of Sylvanas Windrunner. But now, with the story of Sylvanas Windrunner out of the way, now it's time to hear what the community thinks about Sylvanas with That's What We Said. Each lore episode, Countdown to Classic brings you a few posts from forums everywhere as we get to hear a bit more about what the community thought about who or what we were just talking about. So we'll start with the official forums and user Taysiri, who gives a long quote about Sylvanas. Now, this includes some BFA stuff, so it's an up-to-date post including stuff that happened to Sylvanas after Vanilla, but I still think it's a great and very relevant post. So this goes for about 90 seconds or so. Just listen up as I get through this one. I came across this quote in an interview about Battle for Azeroth. Apologies if it isn't transcribed perfectly. Oh, you never know. Anything can happen, and we have nothing to answer on that front. But I know what you mean. I think that it just depends on your perspective. Sylvanas is an interesting character, and a very charismatic leader too. After reading that, I felt the need to tell the writers as honestly and forthrightly as I can that if this is what you wanted to portray with Sylvanas, you failed to do so. This is not the woman that's in-game right now. It's not the woman in the stories and books. Maybe it's the woman in your head. I can't speak to that, but it's not the one that has come through consistently and repeatedly. Sylvanas, as she stands, is corrupt, petty, and venial. She wants only for herself and has no connection to or interest in the Horde. She never has. Her actions have always been strictly for her own benefit. Even after taking up the mantle of War Chief, she's pursued her own interests first and those of Azeroth and the Horde last. For pity's sake, she has her own mob enforcer standing in the wings, menacing players and NPCs to fall in line and swear loyalty to her personally. She's not charismatic, she's not pragmatic, and she's certainly not ambiguous. Years ago in Silverpine, Garrosh asked the difference between Sylvanas and Arthas. Her response, I serve the Horde. But now, she is the Horde, and she's made it clear that to be Horde means to serve her. So I must ask, what's the difference? There is no perspective from which brazenly antagonizing the Alliance, while ignoring or undercutting the Horde's virtues at every turn, can possibly be in the Horde's long-term interests. She's a poisonous and destructive character who acts in direct opposition to everything you seem to think she upholds. Faction pride, moral ambiguity, and a sense that the Horde is anything but conscienceless murderers, and the Alliance anything but spineless victims. Nor is this some kind of late-coming aberration. Indeed, I think Sylvanas is one of the most consistent, even deep characters in World of Warcraft. In Silverpine, in the Siege of Orgrimmar, in Stormheim, she's been driven by her self-interest and self-preservation to tremendous and tremendously vile acts. She's never wavered from that course. Her disregard for the foundational ethics of the Horde, honor, brotherhood, and reverence of the ancestors and nature has been so unwavering that even Garrosh was measured in comparison to her. Indeed, one of his virtues was not being her. Sylvanas has had ample opportunities to turn from her initial position as a leader, her freedom from the scourge back in the Frozen Throne, the realization of her revenge on Arthas in Wrath, her numerous clashes with first Thrall, then Garrosh, then Vol'jin on the subject of honor and the proper conduct of the Horde, and finally her assumption of the mantle of War Chief. And she's changed for the worse. She's embraced the worst crimes of the Scourge, constructing abominations, deploying the plague, and finally raising her enemies against their will to fight their former allies. The very crime she sought revenge against Arthas for. She's rejected her identity as a guardian and caretaker of the Forsaken and sees them and all of the Horde as mere tools to prolong her life and carry out her wishes. And she's sought ever darker means to power, the corrupted Valkyr, their goddess Helya, and now the tainted blood of Azeroth itself. Nor can I, in all honesty, say that she was even very effective at her aims. Her military setbacks are numerous. In Silverpine alone, she was outmaneuvered at least half a dozen times by the Worgen, despite a three-way enmity among her enemies. Her tactics there were less shrewd war leader and more petulant child. Though she stoops to ever more distasteful methods, raising the dead against their will, threatening to torture a man's child, she lost for the plain and simple fact that she could not spot betrayal amongst her own followers. Nor could she stop Putris or the Desolate Council from growing in strength to threaten her rule. And in the former case at least, the Horde as a whole, showing her weakness on the political front. Already in Battle for Azeroth, she is allowing her feud with Saurfang to escalate to the point of dishonor and betrayal. A general knows her enemies and adjusts her strategy accordingly. A politician knows her allies and entices them or inspires them. But Sylvanas does neither, only lashes out when things don't go her way. Believe me, I don't want to have to say this. I know it's often difficult to write with depth and meaning in the very constrained interactions we see in-game, and I know it can be difficult projecting the character you imagine into the character others see. I want to believe the best of the writers here, but there's no two ways around it. The Sylvanas in the game and the Sylvanas you describe in interviews are not the same person. They can't even be reconciled. If that other Sylvanas were in the game, if she'd been in the game for the past 6 years or more, then I might feel differently about Battle for Azeroth. But she isn't. And I don't. To paraphrase Mark Twain, I find that I am indifferent to the bad people in Battle for Azeroth and I hate the good ones. From the perspective of a Horde character and player, I despise Sylvanas for what she's done to the faction, and I cannot bring myself to hate the Alliance for doing the same. Whatever Horde pride she's meant to stir within me, she doesn't. I understand Battle for Azeroth is too late in development to really change anything. The truth is, I don't know if I would even want anything changed. I feel very strongly that design by committee is how the story got in this mess in the first place, and I wouldn't want to contribute. But I did feel the need to explain what I felt and why I won't be joining you in Battle for Azeroth. Whew, we made it. Now that was quite the epic post, and I do apologize for how long that took. I probably lied with the 90-second guesstimation, but there's a very good reason that I read that one out. That was one of the better posts that I found in my research all about Sylvanas, and I really brought that up for one particular reason straight off the bat, and that was this. Much in the way that we got with Thrall when I did a bit of research, obviously, for him and his 2-part episode that was covered earlier on the show, it was surprising to see for what I thought would be such a beloved character, given that Sylvanas is actually my favorite lore character in the game. I had simply presumed that the rest of the WoW community would, for the most part, be positive about Sylvanas. However, I was again shocked to find that it was kind of not quite that way. There was a lot of hate and negativity surrounding Sylvanas, but I must say that obviously this involves a lot of recent content. The story has come a very long way post-vanilla, and obviously the devs have decided to ramp up the content story-wise. That's been no secret. Some say the vanilla story was relatively light, and I appreciate that viewpoint. They've definitely hammered home many more character arcs and character focuses since the expansions have been rolling out. Now, with that, Sylvanas' character has been fleshed out somewhat in what they've given her to do. She's been popping up a lot, and she's now War Chief of the Horde. And obviously her role will be huge in Battle for Azeroth, given, obviously what we saw in the trailer and whatnot. However, coming back to what people think of her and the community in general, since all those developments, her love and affection seems to have taken somewhat of a turn downward. I think back in the vanilla days, people really did think that Sylvanas was a bit of a badass, and that's what I thought. And now they think that she's done a lot of very questionable things. And I just find that interesting and would ask you listeners, what did you think of Sylvanas back in the vanilla days? Did you feel the same as I did? Did you think that she was somewhat of a universally beloved character? We talk about things like her goals and her drive as a character and where her arc might be heading. Now, we've heard a plethora of examples in that epic post that I just read out of some of her perhaps failures as a leader, but also the questionable way, and we heard this in the lore towards the end, about what really drives her. Is she in it for herself, or is she in it for the Horde? No one really knows, and no one can quite pick Sylvanas, but for me, that's part of the appeal of the character. I like that she's not completely transparent. I like the mystery. I like the fact that I can't tell if this is all a bit of subterfuge just to simply drive her own personal agenda. And I like that she's kind of happy to be a deity. I really enjoyed that in vanilla. Dark Lady, watch over you. I loved hearing those lines. For Sylvanas, I loved the fact that we had a race that were completely absorbed by this one character. Now, granted, I think the orcs were obviously back in the vanilla days rather wound up in all things thrall as well, and that was wonderful. But I just think there was a little bit more of an attachment from the Forsaken to Sylvanas as opposed to orcs to thrall. That might be a very controversial opinion, and I'm sure some of you might be jumping up and down right now going, Josh, you are crazy. Thrall was like a god to the orcs. He freed them. He led the way, and I get that. That's fine, but it's pretty fair to argue that Sylvanas did the exact same thing, perhaps to a greater extent. But anyway, I know that personally, I can't wait to serve the Dark Lady as an undead priest when Classic rolls around, because that's what I'll be playing. And I look forward to being one of her liberated people, and whether or not she is simply just seeking to take down Arthas as a selfish goal, you know what? I'll do my part, Dark Lady. I'm in. I love Sylvanas. That's why we did this episode. She'll always be a favorite of mine. But we'll move on to the next post that I found. And this is again at the official forums from user Uryana, who says this. So I've been thinking about this question for some time. Do you think Sylvanas would remain a fan favorite if she was male instead of female? Personally, I think so, though perhaps with a different demographic. After all, she does seem to have most of the traits that makes a male character popular among a certain subset of the female demographic. 1. Dark and tragic backstory. Check. 2. Brooding and complex. Check. 3. Quote-unquote bad boy. Check. 4. The I can change him factor. Most definitely check. 5. Extremely lonely. Check. Kinda starts to remind me of either Loki or Dracula, to be honest. So how does Sylvanas' gender change your perception of her? Is there certain things you think just because she is female? What would really change if her gender was reversed? Now, the reason I bring up that post is to get a little bit abstract here. I know very recently on the show, we just talked about female characters in the game and what Blizzard have done with their female lore characters, to the point that obviously some of the girls that you heard in Monday's interview felt that Blizzard has not really done enough with putting forward these strong female characters, and they might have dropped the ball a little bit in that regard. So I'm not here to shit on that point. This is purely just a little bit of an interesting hypothetical. Would Sylvanas still be a fan favorite to male and female fans if the character were male? In my personal opinion, and I do have fun with little hypotheticals like this, I would say not as much. But I still feel the character would be very popular if it were a man. I just feel that not so much because, as this post points out, it would perhaps be a little bit akin to somewhat of a Dracula tragic figure. But male Dracula has been done. I want to see female Dracula. This is cool. This feels new. That's what appeals to me about Sylvanas. I like the strong female. I've got no problem with this freaking badass female character. That Battle for Azeroth trailer absolutely launched me out of my seat. I loved the sight of Sylvanas looking melancholy a little bit and then turning straight away into the murdering, rib-snorting, banshee queen that she is, flying off arrows left, right and center and blowing shit up. I loved that. But how would I feel if that was a hulking male character doing that? Well, kind of feel like I've seen it before. So to answer this post question, yes, it's an interesting thing to posit on, but I think we're okay with Sylvanas being female. So whilst the character would share definitely a lot of the elements that this poster has ticked off on, yes, that would appeal perhaps to female fans, I don't quite think that the appeal would be there due to the been there, done that feel. Anyway, let's get to the next post. And this is from Fayin over at the Countdown to Classic Discord, who says this: when it comes to Sylvanas, I like to think that she's not evil, just undead. The moral worldview of someone like that would necessarily be different from the living. Maybe the moral compass is just based on something other than the greater good for the living. Now, the reason I bring up that particular comment is this. I do often come back to, as I raised earlier, exactly what drives Sylvanas. It's a very interesting thing to think on. Now, not just Sylvanas, however, it also applies to the general goal and drive of the Forsaken as a race as well. Do we feel that their moral compass is driven towards the advancement of their race simply to forge out a place on Azeroth where they can live in peace and do their own thing? Or are we of the opinion they quite clearly have other goals? Now, obviously what we get in the expansions would seem to, indicate that at least some of them have some pretty other evil goals. However, I do just like to think back to the vanilla days before we had the curtain lifted back a little bit, what we thought of the Forsaken and Sylvanas as a whole in terms of the moral compass. When you played a Forsaken, did you feel like you were doing the Lord's work, so to speak, for the advancement of the race and for the Horde? Or did you feel like an evil undead character doing unimaginable things for perhaps a morally questionable goal? It is an interesting thing to think on. Even though we don't all necessarily role play, we still feel a certain way when we drive these tunes. You pick a certain race sometimes when you're not min-maxing for a particular reason. You enjoy the goals of that race, or you enjoy their values and what they're all about. So how do you feel when you play a Forsaken? Do you enjoy reporting to Sylvanas because you feel that she has raised you from the grips of the Lich King and you are absolutely owing your life or non-life to her because she is going to allow you to live on this world in peace? Or do you simply think that you are serving her to eradicate all other life and that's great? It's an interesting moral question and something to think on. But we go to the next post, and this is from user MeTalks, again at the official forums, who says this. And they were actually replying to the first post I read out, the very, very long one, and here's what they had to say. I stopped reading. The Banshee Queen has shown tremendous empathy for a people who weren't even her own. Learn your law. Now, the reason this one comes up is this. How about we show Sylvanas a little bit of love? Yes, Sylvanas has done amazing things in life and in death. I don't get the impression, at least in vanilla, that she was out to eradicate all life on Earth. I was pretty sure that she was doing the Forsaken's work. She was in their service. Yes, she was trying to eradicate the Lich King and Arthas's threat in Northrend, but I never got the impression that she was really trying to just have the undead take over the world. However, I do still like, as we said, that little bit of grey area that might have stopped some people to think about it. Now, here's what I'll say about another reason why I love Sylvanas, outside of the fact that she's a complete and utter badass. And it's that she did have that slightly altruistic feel to her. I liked that she was doing everything for her people, at least in terms of what she told us in game. That's my recollection. If you feel I'm getting it wrong, email me and say, Josh, you forgot this quest. Josh, you forgot that quest. How about the text where she absolutely basically comes out as being completely selfish? That might well be the case, but not my memory. But my memory is trying to reach back to something 14, 15 years ago, so please do appreciate that. I do like points about her that came up in her life, such as the attachment that she grew with Nathanos in terms of allowing a human and pushing for a human presence within the Elven Ranger Corps and attempting to tear down prejudices and push for inclusion amongst the elves with the humans there, as I think this is a trait that has carried through in her life through death. She still does somewhat seem inclusive. She happily reached out to other races and became part of the Horde. She was accepting of the Tauren, accepting of the Orcs, accepting of the Trolls, and, albeit somewhat begrudgingly, they obviously became a force to be reckoned with, as she was willing to open herself and her people to the help of others in the pursuit of a common goal. I do just enjoy that about Sylvanas. I don't think she's quite the horrible person that some people have made her out to be now, but I do appreciate that that's taking on a lot of the content from the expansions that I'm not really taking into account. But anyway, that's what the community, and namely I, think of my favorite character in the game. But with all that done, now it's time for anger management. Each episode, Countdown to Classic brings you some of the angriest posts about the content that we've just discussed. So, for Sylvanas, we start with user Anti-Venom over at the official forums, who tells us this. I hate Sylvanas. She keeps whining about, ooh, I died, and ooh, I'm so sad. I'm a zombie, and I got resurrected. Let's make it better by slaughtering wildlife and resurrecting other people. She whines about how much she hates Arthas, but she's a lot worse than he ever was. She whines about suffering, but she loves to make others suffer. Remember Garrosh, the psycho who dropped a bomb on Theramore? Yeah, he wasn't okay with the plague bombs, but Sylvanas wanted to use the plague bombs on Gilneas because it would be fun to watch them suffer. If Sylvanas is more evil than Garrosh, yeah. Did I mention how she whines about her curse of undeath? Yeah. What better way to make that better by resurrecting other dead people? Sylvanas is basically a hypocrite personified. Next we have this post from user Stethoscope, who says this. Everyone hates Sylvanas as well. And Jaina. And Yrel. And Tyronda. We should just hate them and raid them and make them all go insane or mad with demonic power until the cows come home, am I right? But Illidan and Malfurion are just misunderstood. Next we have this post from user Pepito who says this: guys are just intimidated by a strong, sexy woman. Now we have this one from user Itchy Bones who says this. And actually, Itchy Bones was replying to the following line: I hope she goes to hell at the hour of her third death. And Itchy Bones pipes up with this: I love Sylvanas Windrunner. I hope she goes to hell at the hour of her third death and drags you with her and then comes back and makes the rest of us milkshakes. And that's been anger management. And now we move on to Tidbits. Each lore episode, Countdown to Classic brings you a few little-known facts about the content that we've just discussed. So, in relation to Sylvanas, what did you perhaps not know, or maybe very much know, and maybe we should tell everyone else about? Well, how about this? The Hallows' End event. The Forsaken have incorporated the notion of Hallows' End into a core part of their culture. Sylvanas hails it as the night where the Forsaken are strongest, the night where their enemies fear them the most. She appears in a ghostly form outside of the Undercity to burn the large Wicker Man, much to the crowd's delight. The Wicker Man Festival celebrates the anniversary of the Forsaken's campaign against the Scourge and Burning Legion and the birth of the Forsaken as a people. Now, I'm not 100% sure if that was expansion-based. I think that might have been vanilla. Write to me and let me know, because I'm too lazy to look it up right now. But we move on to the next point. And did you know that Sylvanas' sister, Verisa, had the nickname back home of Little Moon, while Sylvanas' nickname was Lady Moon? These nicknames were given to them by a young Illyria, who teased them for their hair colours, silvery and pale blonde respectively, in contrast to the golden locks of Illyria and Lyrath, who were the sons of the family, S-U-N-S. However, in Tides of Darkness, Sylvanas is described to have darker hair than Illyria. It has been confirmed to be an intentional retcon. Next, while the text for the expansion item Thasdorah states that Sylvanas became Ranger General following her mother Larissa's death in the Second War, the story Dark Mirror clearly shows that Sylvanas was already an established Ranger General before the Second War had reached Kel'Thalas. Most likely, Larissa was actually killed during the interim between the First War and Second War. Next up, we've got that Silva is the Latin word for forest, and Sylvanas, that's S-I-L-V-A-N-U-S, is a god of uncultivated land in Roman mythology. Both the word and the name are often invoked in regards to elves and elven characters. Next, did you know that all three Windrunner sisters wound up having a human mate? Or at least coming very close to having one in the case of Sylvanas. Or maybe she went a bit further than we think with old Nathanos, who knows. Next up, despite having a physical body and being a Dark Ranger, Sylvanas obviously can still let out banshee wails, just like we see her do in the Battle for Azeroth trailer. Finally, though in life Sylvanas was a high elf, her original model in the World of Warcraft was that of a tall female night elf, but this is because that was the closest model available before the Burning Crusade. During the Wrath of the Lich King beta, she was given a retextured Blood Elf model, and by patch 3.0.2, she was given a unique undead high elf model, more reminiscent of how she appeared in the Frozen Throne. Interestingly, the outfit she wears in the Sunwell trilogy is more similar to those of Sentinel archers than the High Elf Rangers in the same book. And as that tidbit tells us, yes, Sylvanas has gone through a few redesigns over the years, and I think that might have even left out the latest one. But there was a little bit of a risque look there for Sylvanas for a while, with the exposed torso and everything, the midriff showing, and perhaps a bit, more exposed, I guess is one way to say it. But that was subsequently changed again, and she was given a bit of armor and covered up a little bit. I don't know what was the thought process over at Blizzard behind that one. We can make our guesses, but the moral of the story is Sylvanas has gone through quite a bit of change over the years of World of Warcraft. And with all that done, now it's time for Memory Lane. Each episode, when I get enough stories put together, Countdown to Classic brings you some of the listeners' fondest or funniest memories from the vanilla days of World of Warcraft. Now, I put the plea out to all of you recently. Please send me some memory lane stories. I don't have any. And so many of you answered the bat signal, and I am so thankful to the listeners who answered the call. And I got a few episodes now worth of memory lane stories, so thank you so much. But don't be shy. That means if you've got one, still send it in. I will need it at some point. Thank you once again, everyone. And we'll start with listener Auxilio, who tells us this. One of my fondest memories gaming was Vanilla WoW. For a little backstory, it's late 2005, maybe early 2006. I got into WoW a little late, so I'm way behind most people in level. I'm in my mid-20s if I remember correctly, and you finally find a guild that's really friendly and accepting of a noob like me. I find out that the guild has a vent server, so I hop on and start getting to know some of the other players. Turns out that the guild manager's wife played the same class as me, a hunter. Well, she played a hunter, I was very much a huntard at this point. Anyway, we get chatting on Vent, and I find out she's on her way to Ungoro Crater to farm Devil Saws. I'm like, shit, that sounds fun. Mind if I come? She laughs a little and says, I'm a little too low on level, but if I really want to, I could. She ended up protecting me all the way from Duskwood to Stranglethorn Vale, through the Barrens and south, all the way to Ungoro. Now, just as a reminder, I'm in my 20s. We made that run on foot with her protecting me the whole way. Anyway, we finally made it to Ungoro, and I see my first Devil Saw, and I realize just how far my aggro range is when a giant albino Devil Saw comes out of nowhere and murders us. By far one of the fondest memories, mainly because looking back, it's funny to realize just how little I knew back then, and how great the community was to put up with my dumbass. Next we have this one from Countdown to Council member, the Anton, who tells us this. And it's not vanilla related, but I still like it, so I'm going to read it. Here's a little story of something I never thought I'd see with the way the current community in World of Warcraft is. During Warlords of Draenor, I was doing Orkandun for the first time in a pug group. Pretty standard, not much talking going on. Then there's a little piece in the soundtrack where the music goes off the beauty scale, in my humble opinion. Everyone stops moving and stands there saying nothing for something like 30 to 45 seconds. Then someone just goes, wow. We chat a little bit about the music and proceed to finish the dungeon. I didn't expect that. I guess there might be hope for humanity yet. And the next one we have is from Countdown to Classic Discord member Beecher, who says this. Seeing screenshots on the WoW Classic subreddit from the PvP raid on the newly opened realm Northdale made me think of a rather fond memory from back in vanilla. Way back before I had found my right place amongst the ranks of the Horde, I played a little dwarf paladin on the Stormrage server, EU. Not really knowing that much about the big world of Azeroth, other than the stuff I remembered from Warcraft 2 and 3. I'd proudly bought the game for and by myself in February of 2005, but it took a couple of months of convincing various family members to pay the monthly fee. I totally didn't know anything about that, wink wink. Fast forward a few weeks and there I was running around in wetlands, questing alone. All of a sudden, 2 night elves and a human came running by yelling, "For the Alliance!" and other such things. Curious as young me was back then, and having nothing better to do, I simply started following them. It turned out that there was this thing called a raid going on, and I was happily invited to a group with 30 plus people, still not really knowing where we were going. Well, a boat ride and some, understatement here, walking later, we were there. This huge barren wasteland opened up and I just felt so small in this increasingly large world. We walked up to this rather large gathering of Alliance players. Apparently there was a couple of raid groups formed since there were so many of us, under a few trees along the path to Ratchet, and I was promptly told to flag for PvP. This was a normal server. And get ready. All of a sudden, this tremendous non-ending line of Horde players started pouring out of the crossroads, and I remember I started to run for my life. It didn't really matter though, because not 3 seconds later I was charged by a warrior and swiftly dealt with in a single blow. That was my very first taste of PvP. I swallowed my pride, corpse walked back, and joined the others again, taking part in one of, in my mind, the most classic raid experiences you can think of. Raiding your other faction just for the heck of it? I will never forget the glorious and chaotic days of World PvP. Next we have this submission from listener Stefan, who tells us this. I still remember my first character, a hunter called Seeb. I think I was 12 or so when I got the game, and I was close to knowing no English, so I didn't know about quests or anything, and I never understood how people got to higher levels than me being level 17 or so, because I never left the Night Elf starting zone, and I didn't know about boats, flight paths, or spells, so I used many arrows on auto attack, and a lot of cloth gear with intellect, because I thought the blue bar with many numbers meant good damage. Oh boy. And that's been Memory Lane for the week, and there's more coming if you haven't heard yours yet. Please believe me, there'll be more next week, and thank you so much. Please do keep them coming, everyone. But I'll go through a little bit of cleanup now just before I wrap up the show. And I want to read this quick message I got from Reddit user Brand New Watdo, who got back to me on the recent episode about the Dev water cooler breakdown. And they say this. This was probably my favorite episode to date. The hashtag No Changes movement is horrendously misguided in their pursuit and fanaticism. Ask any hashtag No Changer if they want cross-realm battlegrounds. If they say no, and 95% of them will, then they're already advocating for change, just one that fits their idea of what Classic should be. As someone who rated Nax in retail and has done very high-end rating since, changes are going to be mandatory to capture the vanilla experience in today's gaming world. One of the main things raiders remember from vanilla is the server progression races, your rival guild, the thrill of 3+ weeks on a boss and finally having it drop. Without difficulty changes, raiding will be reduced to a shell of its former glory. Sorry to rant on this one, just wanted to toss you some feedback. Maybe I should call in sometime. P.S. I most certainly think a cash shop will be present, and I'd be totally for them putting in all the old tabards from the TCG that existed in vanilla but can't be obtained. Now, I thank Brand New Watdo very much for that feedback. I wrote back to them and I did mention that whilst I disagree that cross-realm battlegrounds are changes, as I see a Frankenpatch of anything 1.1 to 1.12 as being no changes, I do agree with the cash shop perhaps coming our way and the vanilla experience needing to be preserved. Now, that doesn't mean I want to cash shop people. Don't freak out. It just means, as I've said before, I think it might perhaps be coming our way. But back to what I was saying with the vanilla experience. If that means retuning dungeons, then maybe so be it. I have said this before, obviously in the last week. Funnily enough, I think a lot of the staunch no changes flag flyers seem to be softening on that no changes catch cry a little bit with regards to dungeon retuning. Well, If you need to make it a bit harder, then I guess seems to be the attitude that we weren't getting from the no changes a few months ago. And as a fellow no changer, I think I can smell a bit of funny business going on there, but it's all a bit of fun. But also, as I've noted before, with the passage of time, it seems that the changes versus no changes thing is kind of dying down a little bit. So I'll be bringing you the great debate that I plan on doing on the show of the changes versus no changes thing in about 4 weeks before we all forget that it ever happened. But anyway, thank you very much for that brand new Watto. Please do call into the show. I'd love to have you on, as I would love to have any of you on. I really want to hear from all of you for a quick call about any thoughts you might have on anything vanilla World of Warcraft. But for now, that's the show, everyone. There's no calling countdown this week, but I will be taking a couple more short calls this weekend, so hopefully calling countdown should be back with a vengeance next week. Also, a reminder that I would love even more memory lane and anger management submissions. Please do send them through and don't hold back. I always love to bring more and more of them to you. Now, I just want to thank the members of the Countdown Council. Before I go, I call them every week for input on where the show should head in the week to come, so shout out to Borzen, Raidmark, Camp Sowen, Palfuris, Permadrunk, Rarebit, Seven Winters, Tsunami, The Anton, Wilson Ma, and Velarco. Thank you so much for your phenomenal support of the show. I assure you that Countdown to Classic would not be the same without your support. Also, a big thank you to supporters Hurlbut, Good Kisser, Myrtlebank, and Purgatos 81 as always. Thanks for listening, everyone. I shall see you again on Monday with a fun interview with two very good friends of mine here in Sydney, Chans and Loy. They are retired players who will not be returning for Classic, and they haven't really thought of World of Warcraft much in the last few years. But when I brought it up to them recently at a party, they started spewing out hilarious stories about their time with the game back in the day. I asked them if they'd drop around the house and share a few of those stories for the show, and they were more than happy to drop by and have a bit of fun with me. So I really do look forward to bringing you that one on Monday. I can't wait to see you then. Have a great weekend. See you, everyone.